Hi, everybody. This is Tim Garner here, and this is our final week, week 10 of our overview study of Deuteronomy. And we'll be looking at the last two chapters and some final observations and thoughts. So let me share my screen here real quickly. There we go. So this week, our theme for these last chapters will be remember the covenant, indeed, for the whole book, and looking at chapter 4 of Deuteronomy. Moses there says, so watch yourselves lest you forget the covenant of the Lord, which he made with you. And then you, as he says, make for yourselves a graven image. In other words, fall back into the pagan practices. And of course, that is what's going to happen, he says, as you look down at verse 29. But from that condition, they will seek the Lord, he says, for the Lord your God is a compassionate God. He will not fail you or destroy you, nor forget the covenant with your fathers, which he swore to them. So as we know from reading Deuteronomy and, of course, the rest of the history of Israel, the people would, in fact, forget the covenant. However, the Lord would not, in his compassion, would not forget the covenant that he made with them. So thinking about this idea of covenant, just looking at what we consider common definitions of covenant. Covenant is considered a mutual agreement of two or more persons or parties or one of the stipulations in such an agreement. And of course, this idea is pivotal to any relationship. When we think of it spiritually, then, covenant is the promises of God as revealed in the scriptures, conditioned on certain terms on the part of man as obedience, repentance, faith, etc. So that's the common understanding of it. But in understanding covenant in our spiritual lives, it's absolutely pivotal to our relationship to God. So in the same way that we commemorate the life and the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus every Sunday, Jesus actually talks about that as being part of covenant. He said, he took some bread and he gave thanks, he broke it, he gave it to them saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, he took the cup after they had eaten, saying, this cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. So that's what we commemorate, that we celebrate or commune with Jesus as it relates to the new covenant in his blood. As we look at further explanations of this, the Hebrew writer says, but when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things to come, he entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation. And he goes into a lot of detail about he, his body, his blood were all part of that process of instituting the new covenant. And then in verse 15, he says, for this reason, he, Jesus, is the mediator of a new covenant, in order that since a death has taken place for the redemption of the transgressions that were committed under the first covenant, those who have been called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. So, and by the way, I would encourage you to read Hebrews chapters 7 through 10. But Jesus used his own blood to put in place the new, better covenant. And of course, that's basically the theme of Hebrews. So here we are in Deuteronomy, and we're going to be covering the last part of the fourth sermon, as we've described it. These are basically a series of speeches. You can divide them in different ways. And this is the one that has to do with looking outward to who God is. And then, of course, we'll talk about make some observations regarding Moses' death in the last chapter. And here's the Nelson's outline that I've included here, which has a historical, it has a legal layout. We've covered all those details pretty much. And then, of course, this last section that we're in here, which has to do with the prophetic. Now, here's the outline. Chapter 33 contains the idea, as it relates to covenant, the reality that covenant consists of commandments. It's one of the things, law or commandments is what undergirds a covenant. Rules, if you will, they have to be followed. Covenant conveys blessings, as we'll see in chapter 33. Covenant carries protections. It provides protections. And then finally, in chapter 34, we see covenant calls for leadership. That's both a positive and a negative. It can create problems at times. But as we carry on here, Charlie Brown says, "My dog never obeys commands. Other dogs will sit or heel." Charlie Brown says, "My dog has only obeyed one command in his life. I once told him to stay, and he never went home." Snoopy is perplexed. He thinks, "How embarrassing. I've always thought it was an invitation." So here's a quick analysis of the idea of covenant. So in the material world, we can see over here in the left part that a covenant between man and man, it always has an introduction, or it has someone who introduces the idea. There's a historical prologue or a description of the past relations, the connections, the relationships in the parties. Then there's an outline or a description of the stipulations and details. These are the obligations and duties of the parties involved. There are documents that have to be recorded and acknowledged. There are rewards and consequences, or what we say in the spiritual setting, curses and blessings. And then there are people who witness it, who notarize it. God can be a witness in the case of spiritual covenants. And of course, here's the passages. Here's the various places in Exodus and Deuteronomy, Leviticus and Joshua, where a lot of these aspects of the covenant are laid out. If you want this, again, look at the email there at the bottom. You can email me and I'll be glad to send any or all of these slides to you. So really quickly, before we get into chapter 33, let's take a look at the tribal allotments. It might be a little hard to see this map, but you can see from top to bottom, Asher, Naphtali, East Manasseh, Zebulun, Issachar, West and East Manasseh, Ephraim, Benjamin, Dan, Gad, Reuben, Judah. And you can see Simeon here is more or less surrounded by Judah. That's a kind of an interesting idea that we'll come back to in just a moment. So as we get into chapter 33, the first thing we want to understand is that God always blesses with his law, his commandment, and his covenant for his people, to his people. And then we get into some of the specific tribal specific blessings that he offers his people. Reuben, he says, will have long years and numerous people, lots of population. Judah, the Lord will help conquer their enemies. Levi are men of righteous obedience, teaching and worship, hence the reason that they're the priesthood. Benjamin, of course, the youngest of all of the brothers, will have love and safe protection. Joseph will have prosperous land and people, and of course that makes sense as we look at Manasseh, which basically straddles the entirety east and west of the Jordan. Joseph is used as the umbrella term for Manasseh and Ephraim. Zebulun and Issachar will have joyous prosperity and trade. Gad will represent military power and obedience. Dan will have vigorous conflict. They're described specifically as a lion's whelp, not necessarily in a good way, maybe, especially as we look at the life of Samson, who was from the tribe of Dan, as described in Judges 13 through 16. He had a life of a lot of conflict and difficulty. Then there's Naphtali, who is described as being full of favor and blessing. There's Asher, who would be blessed with children and acceptance. And then Simeon is not blessed in this chapter. And of course, that begs the question, why? Could it be Jacob's curse, which is described in Genesis 49? And of course, the background of that is described in Genesis chapter 34. We'll circle back to that in just a moment. And then, of course, the last part of the chapter 33 covers the idea of God protecting his people. He'll always provide protection for his people. Like I said, the chapter has to do with covenant consists of commandments or laws. Covenant conveys blessings, And then finally, we see covenant carries protection. And in chapter 34, we'll talk about how covenant requires or calls for leadership. So why was Simeon not included? Well, in Genesis 49, Jacob, in pronouncing blessings on all of his sons, he says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Further on in verse 7, cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And that kind of makes sense when you look at the map again. And then you see down here, Judah surrounds Simeon. Simeon's more or less engulfed. And really, you won't find a lot of events or things, people of significance coming from Simeon. And Genesis 34 then gives us the background for this. Basically, Simeon and Levi, with malice and forethought, planned the vengeance against Shechem and Hamor and their entire town. Basically, they deceptively, after hearing about the defilement of their sister Dinah at the hands of Shechem, they planned they talked the town into circumcising all the males. And on the third day, when all the males were sore, when they were in pain, then they and others went in, killed all the males and Hamor and his son Shechem, and they took Dinah from Shechem's house and they left. And of course, then the rest of the sons of Jacob and kinsmen went in and took the spoils of the town. And that's why Jacob basically described them as being odious, or causing Jacob and his sons to become odious or a stench to the people around them. So moving on, chapter 34 then. So there's a kind of a material spiritual metaphor that we can glean, I think, at least think seriously about in the life of Moses. Great man, great leader, but there's a kind of a danger in the lapse of faith that he underwent. Hebrews 6, verse 4 through 8, actually, talks about this idea of we can go very, very far in our faith, in our spirituality, but then we can fall away. There's a possibility of that happening. Now, while I don't think there's a spiritual falling away that happened on the part of Moses, there was a lapse of his faith. I mean, did Moses lose his material inheritance? Yes. God said, because you did not believe me, you and Aaron, because you have not believed me, to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, you shall not bring this assembly into the land. So there was a material consequence. Yes. Did Moses lose his spiritual inheritance? I don't think so. Absolutely not. We'll meet him someday when we get there. But there is a kind of a warning that we might not reach our rest being heaven, if we are not careful, if we fail to follow God, if we don't trust him in his judgment. And I would encourage you to go read Numbers chapter 20, read all the particulars of that, and understand more about Moses' character and what God expected of him, to get that whole picture. In that story too, we see that God always keeps his word. For better or for worse, God always keeps his word. We should strive to make real contributions in life before we leave, before we're done. Moses certainly did that. No regrets. He stood at the mountaintop. He was able to convey his leadership to Joshua with God's blessings, God's presence indeed. And we should always strive in whatever way, big or small, to make those contributions in life. And as we close the book of Deuteronomy, we see that there's an ongoing need for new great leaders to be raised up to take the place of old great leaders. So let's just think about taking the metaphors of their material experience, their material journey, and applying them to our spiritual journey, the journey to our rest, as we think about the wanderings and how they conclude in the book of Deuteronomy. So in the tests and trials on their journey as God's people, will we be faithful to God? If I can sort of oscillate back and forth between their experience and our experience. So the Lord gives them a law to follow as they journey. Will we obey Christ? Okay, we have the law of Christ. Will we follow it? As worldly influences are directed at God's people on their journey, will we listen to the warnings? Will you be holy? Will you keep yourself holy before God? So worship for God's people is authorized on their journey. Will we be true, sincere, sacrificial, and supportive in our worship? There's things to think about. How they traveled and who they followed was commanded by God on their journey. Even the place in which God would choose. I love that phrase. Sacrifices, worship, whatever the issue was, there was a place that God would choose. So will we walk orderly as followers of Christ? They will always have battles along the way as God's people journey. Will you fight the good fight? You can kind of see, as I say, the transference between the material experience that they went through and our spiritual experience. They had duties as God's people to accomplish on their journey. Will we perform ours faithfully? There's one source of leadership to guide God's people on their journey. Will we follow that leadership? Among God's people, there will be those who rebel, disobey, fall away as they journey. Will we be among those who fall away? Leaders will make sacrifices to take God's people on their journey. Will I be one of them? Or will we help those leaders? Will we become one of those leaders? There will be blessings for obedience and cursing for disobedience at the end of their journey. Which one will I receive? Which one will you receive? And a faithful God will take care of his people on their journey. Will you revere and trust him? So here's a covenant perspective, kind of a 40,000 foot view of this idea of covenant as it comes to us through the Pentateuch, through the Torah. So in Genesis, we kind of see the covenant's introduction. Genesis 12, Abram, soon to be Abraham. Chapter 15, the promise is given to Abraham because God imputed his faith, Abraham's faith. He imputed it to him as righteousness. Of course, then in the Exodus, we see the covenant's foundation and the giving of the law. Then in Leviticus, we see some of the detail of practices of the covenant, the law, the ceremonial law, the social law, all of those things. And then, of course, in Numbers, we basically have the history of the covenant not in practice, their rebellion, their grumbling, their faithlessness, their fear, really. They didn't believe that they could take the land. They thought that God had brought them into the desert to die of thirst, all of those things. And then as we look at Deuteronomy, we see the covenant was really the kind of fleshing out of this two-way relationship. The Lord's promises to the people about love, protection, and blessings. And then God's expectations of the people's promises to him about love, obedience, and singular worship. So you kind of, that's sort of a perspective if you take the idea of covenant and apply it to the history of Israel. So Calvin doesn't get the idea. He says, Miss Wormwood, I'd like you to sign this contract. It's an agreement that you'll compensate me for any loss of job income I may suffer as an adult because of a poor first grade education. Miss Wormwood replies, if you get a poor first grade education, it will be from your lack of effort, not mine. Get back to your desk. God bless Miss Wormwood. By golly, somebody ought to pay me if I don't learn anything, Calvin thinks or says. Calvin does not get the idea. So remember the covenant? Yes. Remember the covenant. Remember the relationship. So we see covenant consists of commandments, laws, give and take rules, that kind of thing. Covenant conveys blessings. Covenant carries protection And covenant calls for, begs for, indeed, leadership, always. I hope this series has been as big a blessing to you as it has to me. Have a good rest of your week, and hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime. Maybe not with Deuteronomy, but with another class. Thank you very much for your attention.